Hello, I'm Jan Paynter, and I want to welcome you again to our program, Politics Matters. We are very pleased to have as our guest today Professor Paul Gaston, Emeritus Professor of History at the University of Virginia. Welcome, Professor Gaston.
Well, it's my honor to be here.
Paul M. Gaston was born in Fairhope, Alabama. He graduated with a BA from Swarthmore College in 1952. He was granted a diploma from the Danish Graduate School for Foreign Students in 1953. He received an MA and PhD from the University of North Carolina in 1961. He has published a number of books and articles in his distinguished career, including Coming of Age in Utopia, The Odyssey of an Idea, The New South Creed, A Study in Southern Mythmaking, Man and Mission, E.B. Gaston and the Origins of the Fairhope Single Tax Colony, and Women of Fairhope. Paul Gaston has won numerous awards and honors, among which are the legendary Civil Rights Activist Award, the Charlottesville Albemarle branch of the NAACP 2008, Bridge Builders Award, City of Charlottesville 2005, Brown versus Board of Education Recognition Award from the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities in 2004, Honoree, Remember the Struggle, Charlottesville Albemarle branch of the NAACP 2001, Life Fellow, Southern Regional Council, the Bethune-Roosevelt Award for Contributions for Racial Understanding, UVA, 1978, and the Lillian Smith Award for Distinguished Writing about the South in 1970. Paul Gaston and his wife Mary live in Charlottesville. I generally begin the program by asking our guests to discuss what it was which brought them to a life of service in the interests of the public good. In the case of our guest today, he was literally born into it. The journey of the Gaston family is a remarkable and fascinating history, which offers us an unique opportunity to understand what it means to be committed to the cause of economic fairness, independent thought, and racial and social equality. Paul Gaston has indeed remained true to those familial ideals and principles throughout his life and his very significant career as a civil activist, scholar, writer, teacher, and mentor. We are very pleased that he has consented to sit down with us today to discuss the nation's, and most particularly Virginia's, civil rights history and our ongoing quest for social justice for every American. Thank you again, Paul, for agreeing to do this today.
My pleasure.
To begin with, Paul, describe for us, if you would, the genesis of the colony of Fairhope. How did it come into being? Who founded it? And what were the guiding principles on which it was grounded?
The answer really has to do with my grandfather. He was an unusual man. He grew up in Illinois, he was born in Illinois, then he moved to Iowa, and he went to college in Iowa. And for a reason that I can't fully explain, he was angered, moved by the extraordinary inequality which existed in the world into which he was born. He was upset about the disparity in income and wealth. He never used the word the 99% and the 1%. But as I read what he did write, I am reminded of the wide disparity in wealth, power, and privilege which exists in the United States today. Why he decided something had to be done about it. For him, he would not be a satisfied, fulfilled person unless he found some way of meeting head-on this problem. So he started a club. He called it the Des Moines Investigating Club. he called together a few friends of his, and they would meet regularly. I can't remember now whether it was weekly or monthly. And they read important books of the time, books that dealt with the issue of poverty, that dealt with the issues of the wide disparity in wealth, income, and privilege. And they read Henry George's Progress and Poverty, and a man named Grundman, whose first name I've suddenly forgotten. And then they decided that reading and informing themselves was not enough. You had to do something. And so they decided that they would create a community that was designed to illustrate what a just world would really look like. Now, he was barely in his 30s when he did this. He was a young man. He had gotten married. I think he and his wife had had one child by this time. By the time they actually created this community, and they got on a train in Des Moines and traveled with his wife and his 4 children, one of them still in diapers, and went to the site that they had chosen on the eastern shore of Mobile Bay. One of his colleagues said, Gaston, you know, this plan of yours, you've got a fair hope of succeeding. Ah, he said, that's a good name for the community. We'll call it Fairhope.
Interesting.
And he wrote an essay called True Cooperative Individualism.
That's what I was going to ask you about. What does that term mean?
That's a good question, and I want to get in touch with E.J. Dionne. If you've watched E.J. Dionne recently, he has spent a lot of time talking about cooperation and individualism, a time where no longer ought we to have in the United States a society based exclusively on individualism, on an individual doing well. And how do you do well? Mr. Romney reminded us of this, by making money. And we need to split our interests or join our interests between individualism and cooperation. And my grandfather thought that was a good idea, although he hadn't read any E.J. Dionne at that time, since E.J. was not born by that time. And he based his community largely, not exclusively, but largely on the ideas of Henry George. Henry George had written a very influential book called Progress and Poverty. He argued that the great enigma of his time was the melding of poverty with progress. And somehow societies had to learn how to break that nexus between poverty and progress. And he thought that George had the right idea. Basically, it's a little difficult to explain, and some people think it doesn't make much sense. Others think it made a lot of sense. Basically, his idea was that land should never be privately owned. Land should be owned by the community. And it was the speculation in land, the private ownership of land that led to the widespread poverty which existed. The Gilded Age was full of examples of widespread poverty. Yeah, you were going to ask.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I was just going to ask you, I know Fairhope was what was called a single tax colony. Did people pay a set amount, everyone the same amount of money, essentially invested in the land so that they owned it jointly? Was it a one-time payment? How did that work?
The land that the community owned. The community owned the land. They bought it, and they didn't get very much at the beginning. They never had enough land to have a community that would be based on these ideas. But what they did was they paid the colony, as it was called. It was called originally the Fairhope Industrial Association, and later the Fairhope Single Tax Corporation. The idea of how they tried to implement the principle was that land would be leased to members of the colony, and they would pay each year to the colony what was calculated to be the economic rent, what the land was worth, a percentage of what the land was worth. And that was a kind of simulation of the single tax. And I know that every time I've explained that to someone, that it's difficult to be persuasive.
Well, as I was reading the book, I was struggling with precisely what it was, so that makes me feel a little better. I know that one of the things that was very, very singular and important with Fairhope in tandem was also the Marietta Johnson Organic School. And I wondered if you'd speak about the principles under which the school was run and how it differed from other forms of education at the time.
Yes, well, I think that the two things that distinguished Fairhope, that brought progressives to the community, that attracted people who wanted a better world and who believed that it was possible to create a society that was based on justice, opportunity, fairness. And the school was not part of the original plan. But shortly after Fairhope was founded, as a single tax community, a community that would establish justice, shortly after that, Marietta Johnson, who was a school teacher in Minnesota, moved to Fairhope, in large part because she knew people there, and they kept urging her to come.
You speak in the book, or interestingly, about the fact that you were not graded, something that later on you learned about as you went to Swarthmore, and that there was a de-emphasis on competition and a focus on, as I understand it, the whole student, the physical, spiritual, intellectual welfare of the student was stressed.
Yes.
What kind of atmosphere did that create for the students that went to school there? How did it help them to develop intellectually, would you say, and as human beings?
I kept a diary. My cousins gave me a diary. Throughout the diary, I'm writing about, I say that school begins next Wednesday or something, next Monday. I'm really glad. And every entry in my diary talks about the enjoyment of the school, the importance of it, all the things we did, how I liked the teachers, I liked my fellow students, I liked all the things we did.
I know one of the emphasis for the school had to do with learning, for learning's sake, just what you're talking about, and that inculcated lifelong habits, and that this was also, they were also attempting to instill social responsibility.
The idea of child-centered education rather than goal-centered. One of the critics of progressive education, professor here, and he and I used to argue about it quite a lot. And his point was that he felt too much, progressive education was too much a do-as-you-please school. And that wasn't the case with us. It is really remarkable, because what we came to please to do was to work hard and read books and talk about them and feel that there was a rare fulfillment in learning to like to learn.
It makes sense to me, because to me, I think for experience of a lot of people, so much of what stunts people's learning at the beginning is the sense of being strongly judged. And if you remove some of that, you're still making judgments. Obviously, I know in your years of teaching, you found that people become inspired, they relax, and they begin to naturally grasp the material and want more. One of the things, in going back to Fairhope for a minute, and this goes to kind of the crux of a central complexity and contradiction in things, and that is that I know Fairhope was not integrated. And I wondered if you'd speak to your grandfather's decision about that, why he made it, and some of the history of that.
Well, Fairhope was founded in 1894. There was not much enthusiasm in the Deep South for having an integrated society. Racism was running strong in the South in 1894. A member of a person who wanted to be a member of the colony, but was reluctant to become one because there were no black members, and he did not think that that was really consistent with the idea that the land belongs to anyone. Sure. So he wrote to my grandfather and said, I can't support you if you're going to make this a whites-only community. And I would like to be able to remember the exact wording of what my grandfather wrote back to him. He said, this brings up the question of how far we can go in applying correct theories. I can't remember the word.
He had a very interesting phrase which really stuck with me, which maybe you're referring to.
Yeah,
I don't know. He mentioned, your grandfather mentions, for the sake of the survival of the community, I'm assuming, a sort of pragmatic reason, that he felt that we perhaps couldn't, quote, to follow the naked principle of equality unreservedly.
How far we can go in applying the naked principle of equality in a society, that one of his words, but in a society that doesn't support that kind of equality.
Well, it was fascinating, because I think it really goes to the issue of how you accomplish change and how one dissents. and resists, which obviously became an ongoing problem in our country and in Mr. Jefferson's university, which I know you'll talk about later.
Yeah, he was very clearly saying, I translated the very moving words, and I wish I should have brought my book. No, there were very moving words, but in essence he was saying that you're right, that to exclude anyone because of race is contrary to our principle that the land belongs to everyone. He didn't say this land is your land, this land is my land, but I always think of that song when I think of Fairhope, but it never worked out quite that way. And so that happened. And then once the Fairhope school, not the organic school, but the public school, excluded black children. And as Fairhope became a segregated community, the belief became deeply ingrained that there was no contradiction between segregation and the Georgist principles of justice and equal access to the land.
Well, this raises an issue that I've thought a lot about in reading your work, and that is this issue that of Southern, and you mentioned it, cognitive dissonance. And you have a way in which people take unpleasant truths and somehow incorporate them into their ideals of the country and where they live, and in this case, the South. Well, it really goes to the kind of split screen that people in the country and Southerners certainly had about the South, and obviously later on, that's very much true with issues of racism. Professor, why did you decide to teach history at a Southern university? I know you had the opportunity you had the offer to go to Princeton as well, and back to Swarthmore. What factored in your decision?
When I met Mary in college, we were in the same year. We both started a year up, a year beyond where I suppose we should have been. I said, and we had the same feelings about racial inequality, and that something ought to be done about it. Because of the place where I had grown up, justice came when you restructured society with the school, the colony, these things. We had these things so that once people became accustomed to a different way of living, then they would change. We wanted to be involved somehow in the world that was changing the South, and it was pretty clear in the early 50s that was a big issue in the country, and we wanted to be part of it.
Paul, thank you very much for being part of this wonderful conversation today.
Thank you for asking me, Jan. That's very nice of you.